Uninspired tactics and ending to his tenure aside, you can't deny that Maxi Allegri is a Juventus legend. While he may have given the board no choice but to drop him after the Coppa Italia, it's still an ending that, if this was a manager at Benfica in my case, I would have been disappointed in seeing this ending. With the way Allegri's sacking played out, just 2 days after he won a record-breaking 5th Coppa Italia, it's a parting of ways that was always coming, but is a pity. Despite his relationship with the board being icy and sects of the Juventus support angry with his tactics, for all that he has done, he would have deserved to get one last farewell with the Juventus supporters, of whom he brought so much silverware to their beloved club over the years. 12 trophies total, as well as 2 Champions League finals that he was unable to win. It's a divorce that needed to happen in order for Juve to continue to evolve under their new board and circumstances at the club, but it's sad to see how it soured. Though I will admit, as a neutral here, his sideline angry striptease at the end of the Coppa Italia was incredible stuff to watch. Anyway, we'll break down everything that held Allegri back, including himself, when the going was good, and the explosion that led to his sacking. Well, that fast-tracked his sacking. But a quick thank you from our sponsor. Now, as you guys know, I've been using BetterHelp myself since about September of last year, and overall it's been a massive help for me when it comes to having someone who can help me deal with the stress and anxiety of work. Heightened recently with the mini documentary that I'm working on, the Champions League final, Euro 2024 coverage, and a trip to the West Coast for my sister's wedding, all at the same time. Therapy has helped me there big time. BetterHelp makes it easy for anyone to find a therapist because it's remote, meaning it's affordable and accessible. All you have to do to get started is fill out a few questions, and BetterHelp matches you with a therapist who is best suited to your needs in as little as a few days. Want to switch therapists? No problem. You aren't locked into anyone, and it doesn't cost you anything to change therapists on BetterHelp. It's super easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist, and there's a link in my description for you that gives you 10% off. BetterHelp.com/RabonnaTV. So if you are struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp by going to BetterHelp.com/RabonnaTV, connect with a therapist, and see if it helps you. Thank you, BetterHelp, and on to Allegri. There are certain facts that you have to take into account when speaking about Allegri's return to Juventus. Yes, the football was uninspired, but the things we will go over here did not make it easy for him. They worked against him, really. We'll kind of speed run this as fast as possible as it's important pretext, but it's old news stories that you'll just need to be reminded of, not actually hear about for the first time, I'm sure. When Allegri arrived back in 2021, he thought he could count on Cristiano Ronaldo for at least another season with Juventus, but Ronaldo left on the final day of the 2021 summer window. He was part of preseason. He even played for 30 minutes in their first match against Udinese that season. Then he was gone, forcing Juve to bring back Moise Kean on loan from Everton initially with an obligation to buy in 2023. Later that same season, you also had Juve's best attacker in Federico Chiesa blowing his ACL, unfortunately, in January of 2022, which he became quite injury prone since then and hasn't been the same player since then. Understandably so, those knee injuries, man. You also had the center back position being a big problem for Juve. Some players were sold in order to make up the funds that they had spent on Ronaldo, which was a massive operation that cost Juventus a massive amount of money over the years. In fact, just a side note, they were recently ordered to pay Ronaldo 9.7 million euros in back pay that they still owe him. But anyway, you had players like Dragusin, now at Tottenham, De Ligt, Demiral, and Romero all sold off to get some money in. On top of that, yes, they were older, but you also had Chiellini leave in the summer of 2022 and Bonucci in the summer of 2023. They weren't the players they used to be, but those are two massive personalities and leaders in the dressing room, important voices in the squad that had left. In the fall of 2022, the entire Juventus board stepped down, and Agnelli, Nedved, all the fellas stepped down and an entirely new board was appointed. As we went over in a previous video with Jesus Juve, the board was filled with lawyers and accountants in light of what Juve needed on their side. Because Juve would later be handed a 15-point deduction in Serie A, which would later be reduced to just 10 points. The handling of this deduction and the lack of clarity was a bit of a shit show, to use the technical term. It was incredibly messy. On top of that, UEFA then handed Juve a 1-year ban from competing in their competitions, their UEFA competitions, thus restricting Juve's spending power even more so, which was reflected in their transfer window, with just Tim Weah being a new signing for them last summer. Allegri could barely improve the squad. On top of that, they brought back Paul Pogba to be a leader and help them rebuild the club, but he spent pretty much the entirety of his first season, the 22-23 season, injured. He came back and was promptly suspended for doping. Yes, he had another injury in there as well. And that left a hole in their midfield, as Pogba's signing, despite being free, will have tied up too many funds for recruitment. It was too late anyway, the window had closed. And finally, perhaps less impactful, but still, he had become a starter for Allegri. Nicolo Fagioli was also suspended for sports betting in the same fell swoop where Sandro Tonali was suspended. So yeah, like I said, uninspired tactically, but that is a lot of setbacks to have to deal with. I think that's very fair to say. And I'm no Allegri defender or anything. You just got to be fair to the man. Now, despite everything mentioned in the previous section, Juve actually started the 23-24 season pretty well. They were the only team that looked like they could run alongside Inter in the standings, and as of mid-January, they were within 2 points of Inter. I made a video previously about how Juve was rebuilding the club from the boardroom down, and how this forced focus on developing players could actually be great for them in the long-term stability of the club, as they would have less of a reliance on the transfer market. You will always need to sign players, of course, that won't stop, but a strong academy leads to quote-unquote free top talents in your first team, as well as opening the door to a new revenue stream by selling off young players that are not quite a fit for Juve's first team. That was basically the thesis of the video. A little more focus on next gen is a good thing. However, results under Allegri began to slip once again. His tactics and penchant for the cortomuso, which is basically winning by a nose, leads to incredibly tight margins during matches. The game is constantly on the knife's edge, and results could slip quickly to the wrong side. And then you are fighting to get back into a match where the killer blow against you comes too late in the match to be able to recover. That's sort of the football they were playing. It was all good and great until match day 21, but then they went on to secure just 15 points in Allegri's final 15 Serie A matches with Juventus. That's not great at all. That's quite poor. 2 wins in 15 matches is quite horrid, actually. And with the bad form came the Allegri out crowd back in full voice. Because as we always say, it's one thing to play results-based football and get results. In other words, play ugly football and still get results. But when you are playing results-based football and not getting the results, people turn on you quick. And yet, some Juve supporters still supported him. There were banners in the stadium that were in support of Allegri saying things like, "Mr. Allegri, you must stay. We want to go to the World Cup with you." That, of course, is in reference to the Club World Cup next summer that he managed to qualify Juventus for. And so amongst all of this, now, even prior to the Coppa Italia final, Allegri had been asked about his thoughts on his future and the links to other coaches at Juve numerous times. In April, rumors of Motta replacing him had really caught fire, and Juve's approaches to Bologna for Motta were sort of an open secret. When asked about his future, Allegri himself admitted that nobody at the club had confirmed or communicated anything to him, but it seemed as though he wouldn't be the coach next season. He assumed as much. Also, coupled with the feelings of a large group of supporters that didn't want him to continue at the club due to the poor football, that was the vibe going into the Coppa Italia final. A bit awkward. Juve won the final, of course, 1-0, but there were some refereeing decisions along the way that they rightfully will felt hard done by. I actually agree with their frustrations, as the officiating was a little bit against them on a couple of calls, as Atalanta should have had a player sent off, etc, etc, etc. There's a few occasions. But anyway, that aside, while I agree with having frustrations, Allegri's meltdown was absolutely nuclear. He began screaming at the fourth official. He began removing clothing. His own clothing, not that of the fourth official. This is nothing new. Allegri stripping on the sidelines as he ripped off his jacket is a regular occurrence. He began putting it back on, then ripped it off again when he was given a red card. He removed his tie also, and the man even threatened to take his shirt off as he began unbuttoning his shirt. It's honestly hilarious to me, because to start removing your clothing as your first thought when you're enraged, I can't relate. So Allegri storms down the tunnel after he was given his marching orders, and at some point he comes across Tutto Sport editor Guido Vassiago. And Vassiago alleges that Allegri shouted all sorts of things at him, calling him a shit editor, telling him to write the truth and not what the club tells him to write. I guess he's alleging that the club is trying to get rid of Allegri, and Vassiago is a mouthpiece for the club. Vassiago also alleged that Allegri told him he would rip both of his ears out, all kinds of things. Allegri would release a statement denying the threats, but acknowledging the interaction with Vassiago. Vassiago would respond to that statement by essentially saying that the denial is almost worse to him than what Allegri said to him, as it's outrageous, and that Vassiago has a ton of eyewitnesses who can corroborate what he accused Allegri of saying in the tunnel of Stadio Olimpico. And finally, following the match, while the players were celebrating, Allegri came back out onto the pitch and was seen angrily stomping around the pitch, making gestures toward the Juve board members that were on the pitch, such as Giuntoli and Scanavino, with his actions either being interpreted as gesturing for them to get away from the players or simply rejecting any attention from them. Who knows? After the match, he also said, "I leave." Then he corrected himself and said, "If I leave a Juventus that is victorious." So the guy knew what was happening. 2 days after winning the Coppa Italia, it was announced that Maxi Allegri was sacked with immediate effect and he would not preside over Juve's final 2 matches of the season. What a way to go out. You've just won your record-breaking 5th Coppa Italia as a manager and you're gone. It's happened a lot to previous Juve managers. They win a trophy and then they're gone. The statement from Juve said, quote, "The firing follows certain behaviors during and after the Italian Cup final that the club deemed incompatible with the values of Juventus and the behavior that those who represent it should have." So no doubt Allegri will feel disrespected and probably as if he doesn't really recognize Juve anymore, now that all of his homies like Agnelli and Nedved had moved on. I mean, Allegri allegedly turned down Real Madrid and came back to Juve because he had that great relationship with Agnelli and their friends. Now, I sound like a broken record at this point with how many times I've said this on my own channel and even on Just Juve's channel once before, but Allegri to me was never someone who was going to elevate Juventus. That was my opinion when they brought him back. He was good for stability at the time when they needed it, but he would never elevate them footballing-wise, tactically. Given the sheer amount of setbacks he had to put up with, I don't know that less experienced managers could have done a better job with what they had at their disposal. Just think back to the first part of this video, losing Ronaldo on the final day and having to pivot, constantly losing massive presences like Chiellini and Bonucci in the locker room, losing center backs constantly, the entire board stepping down, the point deductions, the European bans, ensuring your already precarious financial situation is now quite dire, losing a midfielder like Pogba, losing Chiesa for a long stretch, Fagioli suspended, and then a fairly public courting of your replacement despite still having another season on your contract. Not to mention not being able to sign players. These are things that plenty of managers would have crumbled under, that's for sure. And when they did crumble, they would clean their hands of everything, say that their failure was because the game was rigged from the start, so to speak. Yes, I'm still in the Fallout mood. And then they would move on. I mean, seeing the meltdown that he had, I guess he did crumble technically, but far later than most would have, considering everything else he faced. So when you look at it through this lens, I still think that moving on from Allegri is the right thing to have done for Juve. Not just because his relationship with the club was at a point of no return, but because he couldn't elevate the team tactically anymore. At times, it was results-based football without the results, like we said. I mean, 15 points in 15 matches is a big yikes. But the vitriol for him from certain Juve supporters is really unfortunate in my opinion. I can understand it while going through the season as the results are poor and emotions are high, but now that he's gone, to tap dance on his Juve grave as if he is the cause of all of Juve's problems just seems a little much. Plus, he got you back into the Champions League, the Club World Cup, which will be interesting I guess, and with another Coppa Italia trophy. Doing so against an in-form Atalanta side who managed to make 2 cup finals this season. So the sacking makes sense. He basically forced the hand of Juve, more like he gave them a reason to do it earlier, to do what they already wanted to do, and sack him for bad behavior. It was coming regardless, Allegri knew that, but it just went down in a borderline sad way for someone who has won so many trophies for the club and helped them win another one at a time when they have been the most fragile. He at least deserved a send-off. Anyway, that's all for this one. What a wild ride with Allegri and just Juve in general over the last few years. Thanks as always for watching. I appreciate you guys taking the time, and I'll see you soon for a Champions League final preview. Ciao, guys.